My ex-wife mocked my rusted sedan and reported me for a fake organized scheme, never suspecting that the garage she dared me to open held a fortune and a lethal secret that would force me to fight for my life. She thought I was a failure with a hidden pile of illegal items, but when the authorities breached my sanctuary, they didn't find the evidence they expected. They found a reality that put everyone involved in the crosshairs of a shadow war. I've always been a man of simple pleasures. When my ex-wife Sarah left me 3 years ago, her final jab wasn't about my personality, my income, or even our failed chemistry. It was about my daily driver. She stood on the curb, pointing a manicured finger at my rusted 2008 sedan, and laughed. "This is exactly why we didn't work out, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending pity that only someone who views life as a status competition could muster. "You're comfortable with mediocrity. You surround yourself with dust and old things that don't serve a purpose. I need someone who looks forward, not someone who sits in the past of a failing economy car." I didn't fight her. I didn't defend the car, which was mechanically perfect despite the peeling paint, and I certainly didn't mention that the car was a deliberate choice, a disguise. I just watched her drive away in her leased luxury SUV, a vehicle that cost more in monthly payments than I spent on groceries in a year. She thought she knew me. She thought I was the quiet, unassuming guy who worked a mid-level logistics job and spent his weekends tinkering in a detached shed behind my property. To her, that shed was a junk pile. To me, it was my sanctuary, and it was worth more than her suburban mortgage. The truth is, I've spent the last decade curating a collection that would make even the most seasoned auction house curators weep. I don't believe in stocks or crypto. I believe in cold steel, combustion engines, and the history of engineering. My garage isn't just a shed, it's a climate-controlled, reinforced bunker buried beneath a nondescript exterior. But that's not what bothered me. What bothered me was the smug look on Sarah's face when she'd drop off our daughter Maya and make sure to park her shiny, overpriced toy right in the middle of my driveway, almost as if she were marking her territory against my poverty. Yesterday, Sarah dropped by unannounced, claiming she needed to discuss the future of our daughter's education. She didn't even knock. She walked straight into my house, marched through the kitchen, and stopped dead when she saw me holding a wrench, my hands covered in grease. She sneered, eyeing the grime under my fingernails. "Still playing with scraps, Mark? You know, the neighbor was complaining about the noise coming from your shed. If you're running some kind of organized scheme or hoarding illegal goods in there, maybe you should think about how that reflects on Maya." I froze. I wasn't doing anything illegal, but the way she said organized scheme hit a nerve. I knew what she was implying. She was looking for a reason to frame me for something serious, anything to get sole custody of Maya so she could move her to the city. I looked her in the eye and kept my voice calm. "It's a hobby, Sarah, just old metal and oil." She didn't believe me. She walked past me, heading straight for the back door, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood. "I'm checking, Mark. If you're involved in anything that could bring a heavy charge or a grave legal accusation to this doorstep, I'm calling the police. I don't want my daughter anywhere near a potential criminal record." I lunged to stop her, but I was too slow. She shoved the door open and marched toward the shed. I followed her, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had left the biometric keypad on the shed's side door exposed for a split second while I was moving a frame, and she had seen it. She reached the door and stared at the sleek, modern interface. "What is this, Mark? You don't have this kind of money. Who are you really?" I realized then that she hadn't just come to talk about school. She had been watching me. She knew something was off, and she was already on her phone, typing something out. She looked at me, a cruel, predatory grin spreading across her face. "I already alerted the local authorities that you might be hiding something dangerous here. I told them I saw you moving crates late at night. They're on their way to conduct a search. If there's so much as a stray bolt that looks like part of an illegal weapon, you're looking at a huge, life-ruining sentence." I reached for her arm, desperate to stop her from escalating this, but the sound of sirens cut through the air. The police were already turning onto my street. They weren't just responding to a noise complaint, They were rolling in like they were hitting a major criminal cell. My neighbor, the one Sarah had been talking to, was standing on her porch, pointing at my property. As the lead cruiser swerved onto my lawn, kicking up dirt, I saw an officer step out, hand already resting on his holster, looking at me with the cold, hardened eyes of someone expecting to find something truly sinister. Sarah turned to me, her eyes gleaming with triumph, and whispered, "Let's see what you're really hiding, Mark." The lead officer approached, his expression grim. "Mr. Vance, we have a report of a high-security stash of restricted goods on these premises. We have a warrant to search the entire property, starting with the outbuilding. If we find so much as a shadow of evidence pointing toward a criminal organization, you're done." He signaled the others, and they moved toward the shed, their hands hovering over their gear. I watched as they punched a code into the keypad, a code they shouldn't have had, and as the heavy, steel-reinforced door slowly creaked open, the first flash of sunlight hit the chrome of my 1962 Ferrari GTO, and the lead officer stopped dead in his tracks, his radio crackling with a sudden, panicked update. The silence that descended upon the yard was deafening. The lead officer, a man whose badge read Detective Holloway, stood paralyzed in the threshold. The morning light didn't just reveal a car, it illuminated a gallery of mechanical perfection that clearly defied the economic reality of the man standing in the driveway. The Ferrari, sitting on pristine concrete, caught the glare of the police cruiser's rooftop lights, turning the shed into a kaleidoscope of reflected blues and reds. Sarah, who had been grinning a moment ago, looked as if she'd been slapped. Her mouth hung open, her eyes darting from the Italian masterpiece to the rows of vintage Jaguars, Porsches, and custom-built engines that lined the walls like jewelry. She had expected a chop shop. She had expected to find crates of forbidden items or the cold steel of illegal weapons. Instead, she was looking at a fortune that made her own net worth look like pocket change. "Detective?" one of the younger officers called out, stepping into the space. He stopped just as Holloway had, his jaw dropping. These aren't just cars. This is an entire auction catalog. I don't see any sign of an organized scheme or restricted contraband." Holloway didn't answer immediately. He stepped further into the garage, his boots clicking softly on the epoxy floor. He walked past the Ferrari, his gloved hand hovering inches from the polished paint of a 1954 Mercedes Gullwing. He turned back toward the door, where I stood, still covered in grease and sweat, with Sarah looking like she was witnessing an alien abduction. "Mr. Vance," Holloway said, his voice unusually low, "you claimed you were a logistics coordinator. The math on this doesn't add up. Nobody collects this level of history on a desk job salary. Who are you, and why does the internal security database have a red flag attached to your property address?" My heart sank. A red flag. I knew exactly what that meant. Somebody had been watching my account movements, or perhaps my digital footprint had pinged a server I thought I'd scrubbed clean years ago. Sarah stepped into the light of the garage, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and greed. "See? He's laundering money. He's clearly involved in some organized scheme. Look at this place. It's a front. Arrest him. He's a criminal." Holloway ignored her, his gaze locked onto mine. He pulled a tablet from his belt, swiping through several encrypted files. "We didn't come here just for a noise complaint, Mark. We received an anonymous tip claiming you were involved in the distribution of restricted substances and high-level racketeering. The informant was very specific about the secret vault beneath the floorboards." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had a subfloor compartment, but it was for spare parts, rare documentation, and a small backup server. Nothing that could be legally construed as illegal, yet entirely suspicious if presented out of context to an aggressive investigator. "The floor," Holloway ordered, pointing to the spot beneath the gullwing. "Move the vehicle." "Detective, that car is worth $3 million, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "If you scratch the chassis moving it, you're looking at a lawsuit that will dwarf your precinct's annual budget. Let me move it." As I stepped toward the car, Sarah lunged forward, trying to grab the keys from my workbench. "Don't let him touch the car. He's going to trigger a trap or destroy evidence. In the scuffle, Sarah stumbled, slamming her shoulder into a heavy shelving unit. A metal box tumbled from the top shelf, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. It popped open, and a stack of authentic vintage documents, the kind that showed exactly how I had acquired these assets through legal, albeit incredibly private investment channels, spilled out alongside a flash drive I had stashed away for emergencies. Holloway snatched the drive from the floor before I could reach it. He plugged it into his tablet. His expression shifted from professional skepticism to genuine shock. He looked at me, then at the documents, then back at his tablet, where a series of encrypted access codes were beginning to unlock a hidden directory. "My God," Holloway whispered, his face turning pale. "You're not a criminal, but you're on a list you have no business being on. How did you get these clearance keys?" Before I could answer, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb, moving with a speed and aggression that made the patrol cars look like children's toys. Two men in charcoal gray suits stepped out. Not police, not official, but something far more dangerous. Holloway turned to look, his hand flying to his holstered weapon. "Don't touch that drive," he warned me, but it was too late. The men were already walking up the driveway, ignoring the officers, heading straight for the shed. One of them pulled a device from his coat that emitted a sharp, high-pitched electronic hum, and every light in the garage instantly flickered and died. The darkness in the garage was absolute for 3 terrifying seconds. Then, the backup emergency floodlights kicked in, a harsh, sterile white that made the room feel like an interrogation chamber. The two men in gray didn't look like law enforcement. They moved with the rhythmic, calculated precision of people who had never had to worry about a warrant in their lives. "Detective Holloway," the taller man said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished stone. He didn't even glance at the police officers. He kept his eyes locked on me. "You're stepping into a jurisdiction you don't understand. Put the tablet down. That drive isn't evidence. It's a security breach." Holloway, usually the loudest person in the room, suddenly seemed to shrink. He looked at the drive in his hand, then at the men, and slowly stepped back, his hand retreating from his weapon. "Who are you? This is a private residence under active investigation." "This residence is currently a site of a potential compromise," the man replied, stepping fully into the garage. He walked right past the Ferrari, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the concrete, and stopped 3 feet from me. He turned his attention to Sarah, who was trembling now, her greed replaced by a sudden, sharp realization that she had played a game she didn't know the rules to. "And you, ma'am, are currently in possession of information that has been classified since the mid-90s. You're going to step outside and wait by your vehicle. Your silence is no longer optional." Sarah, usually the one to demand to speak to managers and file complaints, didn't argue. She turned and practically sprinted toward her SUV. The man turned back to me. "Mark, or should we use your previous designation? We've been tracking the digital noise from this property for 48 hours. You were supposed to be retired. You were supposed to be the simple man with the rust bucket car." He gestured dismissively at the row of classics. "These are beautiful distractions, but we both know why you really keep them here. They're mobile assets in case of an extraction. We need the drive." I stood my ground, my heart hammering. "I retired fair and square. The documents on that drive prove every transaction was legitimate. I'm a citizen, not a field asset." "You're a person of interest in a global financial architecture that doesn't exist on public ledgers," the man countered. He reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for a small, thin envelope. He slid it across the workbench. "You're being watched by people who don't care about your vintage collection, Mark. They care about the legacy code you kept when you walked away. If the local police stay here, things will get messy. Real messy. You have a daughter. Do you really want her name appearing on a security manifest?" I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. "You leave her out of this." "Then cooperate. We know about the subfloor beneath the Mercedes. We know you haven't just been collecting cars. You've been collecting leverage." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. The internal security check that Holloway initiated? It wasn't an accident. It was a baiting maneuver. Someone wanted to see if you'd panic and try to wipe the server. You didn't. That makes you valuable again. Holloway stepped forward, clearly confused and visibly shaken. I don't know who you are, but you can't just barge into a scene and start throwing orders around. I have a chain of custody to maintain. The second man in gray turned to Holloway. He didn't say a word. He simply held up a small, rectangular badge that caused Holloway to go completely white. The detective's knees visibly wobbled. He looked at me, then at the man, and took a long, shaky breath. Sir, Holloway stammered, his authority completely evaporated. I had no idea. We were just responding to a tip about an organized scheme involving prohibited materials. We didn't know the property was under internal oversight. Leave, the man said. Holloway didn't need to be told twice. He gathered his officers, signaled for them to pull back, and they retreated as if the garage were on fire. The heavy steel door was left standing open, the morning air rushing in, but I felt trapped. I looked at the man in the gray suit. What happens now? Now, he said, tapping the envelope on the desk. We see if you're still as talented as you were when you built the system. There's a ghost in the machine, Mark. Someone has been siphoning accounts from the very entity you thought you escaped. They're using your old signature, and they're planning to trigger a total shutdown of the network in less than an hour. Suddenly, the monitors on my workbench, the ones that were supposed to be disconnected, flickered to life. Lines of code began scrolling across the screens at a blinding speed, turning deep crimson. The man's eyes widened. It's already begun. They're wiping your history, Mark. If they finish, you won't just be a civilian anymore. You'll be the prime suspect in a disaster that will frame you for everything they've done. I jumped to the console, my fingers flying across the keys. My heart sank as I saw the destination of the data dump, the police server Holloway had just left with. They're framing me using the local department's terminal, I shouted. Fix it, the man commanded, drawing a small, silenced sidearm and stepping toward the door to guard the entrance. You have 5 minutes before the authorities get the notification that you've hacked their internal database. Can you bypass their encryption, or are you going to let them label you a monster? The terminal glowed with an aggressive, rhythmic pulse, the code cascading like a waterfall of red warnings. My fingers blurred across the mechanical keyboard, the familiar clack of the keys echoing against the silence of the garage. I wasn't just typing, I was fighting. The ghost in the system was elegant, sophisticated, and utterly ruthless. It was utilizing my own old-school encryption protocols, the kind I had designed specifically to be unbreakable, against me. 2 minutes, the man in the gray suit warned, his posture coiled and watchful as he stood by the door, eyes scanning the driveway for threats. Outside, I could hear the distant, growing wail of sirens. Holloway's crew was moving fast, likely reacting to the automated alerts the system was now pushing to their dispatch center. They were being fed a narrative that I was a high-level digital insurgent. I need time, I snapped, my eyes darting across the terminal. The data was streaming into the local police department's central server at a terrifying rate. If the upload finished, my digital fingerprint would be stamped all over a massive breach of infrastructure, turning my life of simple, quiet retirement into an international manhunt. Sarah was still out there. I caught a glimpse of her through the gap in the garage door, pacing near her SUV, clutching her phone. She was watching me, her face pale, no longer looking for a quick win or a custody advantage. She was looking at the man in the gray suit with the weapon at his side. She was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the man she had mocked for his mediocrity was a pivot point in a much larger, much darker reality. 1 minute, Mark, the stranger hissed. They've flagged the IP. Holloway's team is turning around. I reached the core directory of the intrusion. I had to create a recursive loop, a trap for the ghost. It was a risky maneuver. If I miscalculated by even a millisecond, the system would identify the interference and trigger a scorched earth command, permanently wiping my own backup servers, which were the only proof of my innocence. I bypassed the firewall, my pulse thundering in my ears like a drum. I saw the ghost's signature. It was my own. It was a replica of my personal access key, created years ago. Someone had been holding on to it, waiting for the right moment to burn me. I hit the command to reverse the flow, funneling the data back into a void, forcing it to consume itself. Connection severed, the screen blinked. Then, the progress bars stalled. "Is it done?" the man asked, his voice tight. "It's contained, but the log files are corrupt," I said, my voice hoarse. "They'll still find the metadata. They'll still know someone was messing with their server." "That's enough," he replied. "We just needed to stop the transfer." But the terminal screen changed again, shifting from red to a terrifying, steady amber. A window popped up, and a single line of text appeared, blinking in the dark space of the screen. "Found you, Mark. Enjoy the cell." My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a ghost, it was a live feed. And the location data being sent to the police wasn't the garage. It was being routed to my home's digital security system, which was currently arming itself to lock the house down completely. The garage doors, heavy and steel-reinforced, began to groan as the electric motors whirred to life, slamming shut. "What are you doing?" the man shouted, rushing toward the door, but it was too late. The heavy steel barricades slammed down, plunging us into total, claustrophobic darkness. I scrambled for the emergency release, but the system had been fried by the bypass. Outside, the screech of tires announced the arrival of the police. Holloway's voice boomed over a loudspeaker, but it sounded distorted, as if the local frequencies were being jammed by something much more powerful than a police cruiser. Then, the workbench monitor flickered one last time, displaying a grainy image from my front porch camera. It wasn't the police. It was a black, unmarked van blocking the driveway, and men in tactical gear, not police, not the agency, but a third party, were pouring out, moving toward the garage with heavy, industrial cutting torches. "They're not here to arrest you, Mark," the man in the gray suit said, his voice unusually calm, almost resigned. "They're here to erase the garage. And everyone inside it." He clicked his weapon, the sound loud in the enclosed space. "I suggest you open that subfloor vault now, because if we don't have what's in there before those torches melt this door, we aren't walking out of here alive." I looked at the floor, then at the heavy steel door, and finally at the camera feed on the screen. The cutting torches started to spark, casting a hellish orange light through the cracks in the doorframe. I pulled the lever for the vault, and as the floor panels began to slide back, I realized that the secret I had been guarding wasn't just money or history. It was the only thing that could stop what was coming next. And Sarah was still trapped on the other side of the door. The roar of the cutting torches sounded like a dying beast, metal shrieking as it fought the tempered steel of my sanctuary. The man in the gray suit, who finally introduced himself as Agent Vance, no relation, didn't waste a second. He dived into the subfloor vault, his hand steady as he pulled out a small metallic briefcase shielded by a lead-lined exterior. "This is the kill switch for the entire network," he shouted over the grinding of the torches. "The people outside? They're a rogue faction that went dark years ago. They think if they destroy this vault, they own the future. They don't know you encrypted the only copy of the decryption key into the chassis of the '62 Ferrari." I looked at the car. It wasn't just a collector's item. It was the physical storage unit for the most sensitive data in the world. I scrambled to the center console, pulled a hidden panel beneath the dashboard, and withdrew a tiny, pulsating drive. The heat in the room was rising as the torches breached the main door. A sliver of blinding daylight pierced the gloom, followed by the heavy thud of a boot hitting the concrete. "Get behind the car!" I yelled. Vance clicked his safety off, aiming at the opening. I didn't fire. I did something else. I slammed the drive into the garage's internal mainframe, bypassing the local network entirely and linking directly to the satellites I had been monitoring for years. I wasn't just defending myself. I was broadcasting. I triggered an automated emergency alert to the central office of the agency that oversaw the entire sector. If I couldn't stop the attack, I would make sure the world saw exactly who was committing it. The door burst inward, sending a cloud of sparks and smoke billowing into the room. 3 figures in tactical gear flooded in, their weapons raised. But before they could fire, the entire garage lit up with a piercing, high-frequency sound, a sonic deterrent I'd installed for exactly this scenario. They collapsed, clutching their ears, their weapons clattering to the floor. Outside, the screech of tires returned, but this time it wasn't the police. A tactical team, the real one, the ones authorized by the agency, descended on the property. They didn't come to talk. They neutralized the rogue agents in seconds, dragging them away with the clinical efficiency of a professional cleanup crew. Holloway walked up to the threshold, his face a mask of bewilderment. He looked at the wreckage of my door, the unconscious mercenaries, and then at me. "Mark, what in the hell is going on?" I stood up, wiping the grease and the weight of the last 3 years off my hands. "It's over, Detective. You can file your report. Tell them it was an attempted heist by a group of radical thieves. The agency has everything else handled." Sarah stood on the grass, her SUV door open. She was staring at me, her face pale, finally understanding that the man she had divorced wasn't a failure. He was a guardian of something so big it defied comprehension. She opened her mouth, likely to apologize or ask a dozen questions, but I simply held up a hand. "Go home, Sarah. Take Maya to school. That's the only reality that matters now." As the dust settled, Agent Vance approached me one last time. He handed me a folded piece of paper, not a subpoena, not a threat, but a clean slate. "You saved a lot of lives today, Mark. The system is secure. Your identity is wiped from the database. You're a ghost now. You can stay in this house, or you can walk away and never be bothered again." I looked at the Ferrari, then at my quiet suburban home. The neighbors were emerging from their houses, gawking at the scene, their phones out. I knew I couldn't stay. The simple life was gone, burned away by the truth. 3 months later, I was living 3 states over, in a town where nobody knew my name. I was working at a small machine shop, just a man with a set of tools and a quiet, unremarkable life. My new car was a reliable, beat-up truck that nobody would ever look twice at. I didn't have the classics anymore. Those had been moved to a facility for safekeeping. But I had something better: peace. One evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. My phone buzzed. It was an anonymous message. "The audit is complete. Your name is cleared. Keep driving." I smiled, poured a cup of coffee, and walked toward my truck. I turned the ignition, and the engine purred to life, not with the roar of a $1 million motor, but with the honest, steady rhythm of a man who was finally, truly free. I didn't care about the status, the secrets, or the mockery of my past. I hit the gas and drove into the twilight, ready for a future that was finally mine to write.